versus putting more information in something that's a public record so that we don't get into too many details of the case. And so we had talked about having those meetings to discuss the why so that we could have that understanding and learn from each other as to why there was a different resolution on the case from each of the investigative bodies. But we haven't done that yet. So I'm happy to either pick through some of those cases, because obviously there was a lot of them that we can do that on, or we can do it from a certain point moving forward. But the reason that the letters are written the way they were was for that purpose, which I thought we had discussed, like I said, when we met back in January.
I don't remember agreeing to that. I mean, certainly discussing the whys of things and learning is advantageous for sure. But I would say that the public absolutely needs to know that is the reason why, what the chief's non-concurrence is, what's the basis for it. So keeping that from the public is counter to what we're here to do. So I don't understand that our letters say specifically, this is what we found, here's what the evidence was, and here's what we determined, sustained, not sustained, exonerated, whatever it is. Say that there's nothing for the public to look at side by side that says there's a difference of opinion. There's no analysis we can do that will help us figure out how we're different, how civilians see it differently than the police department does. So I know I didn't agree to that. That the letters would be that circumspect. I would not do that because I think it's not what we signed up to do. I don't think it's what the city council asked us to do.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Chair Fine, on the ordinance that we're going to be talking about later tonight, in attachment C, one of the things that we talked about was the non-concurrence, and we've added a recommendation in the ordinance that the chief would come and explain publicly why there's non-concurrence. Well, so we'll talk about that later.
I appreciate that, and I think that certainly our commitment is to the public and to make sure that the public knows that there is a difference of opinion and what it is. And I don't think, on the other side, I don't think that the chief can learn from us how we see things unless we're in a dialogue. So I appreciate your willingness to have a dialogue. It just doesn't supplant the need to be straight with the community and be upfront with it. So the letters don't do it for me at all. I don't know, how do you all feel?
I concur.
I have a question, Chair Fine. I want to figure out a way for it to be qualitative in the terms of discussion, as Major Tyler is suggesting, but also for it to be on record. And couldn't that occur at case review? Couldn't a block of time be given to why, wherefore, why it didn't jive, why we didn't jive, and that would still go in public record, right?
Well, the way we had envisioned it at the case review committee was that we would post those letters side by side. This is what the CPOB approved and how our staff saw the evidence, and the chief said otherwise. And there may be very legitimate reasons for the chief to see it otherwise, but we're missing an opportunity to be transparent, and we're missing an opportunity to learn from each other. And those two things are reasons why I would not be in favor of it not saying it in writing, or as the ordinance proposal says, to have some kind of public forum where that can be accessible to the public. I'm concerned about the data too, because that's part of our thing. If we're looking at this and looking at data collection for the city council, for the police department, take a look at this. If we don't have something in writing, we don't have any data. So that bothers me. What about y'all? And so who else has something to say about this?
It just makes sense.
It just makes sense. I just think that's what. Mr. Moya, can you tell me from the ordinance? Was it not your expectation that the reasons why there was a non-concurrence would be explained in writing by the chief?
Chair Fine, board members, I'm looking through the ordinance right now, and what I recall from the time is that was the intent of of the ordinance.
Mr. Baker, do you have any thoughts on this?
I was pulling up the language now, but you've heard from the council that was the intention, and I remember the language being drafted in a way that suggested it wouldn't just be I didn't concur or, bullet point form. How to navigate that and the extent of it, I think, is something that should be worked on so that you all have the information you need.
Yeah, Major Tyler, I'm going to ask Mr. Harness to speak, but if you have anything more you want to add, just do so. Come on.
No, Chair Fine and members of the board, we're happy to work with you to make sure that you're getting what you need for it to be meaningful for the citizens of Albuquerque.
Does this rationale make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we're trying to make sure that we're careful about the content of the cases because obviously, as you know, much of that is confidential, but I understand the need to have an understanding of why there would be a non-concurrence.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harness.
Yes, Chair Fine. I share your reaction to the non-concurrence letters that they do not meet the standard that's set forth in the ordinance nor the settlement agreement. I would like to briefly discuss a couple of the letters that we received. First one is on case 088-16.
Wait, let us help find it. Just a second. What's the number?
08816. It's third in the batch there, I think.
I'm sorry, say it
It's
again.
third in the batch.
Third in the batch. Okay.
Yes, I think if you page through, it should be the second or third. Got it. You'll recall this was the case where the sergeant and his attorney came and presented to the body regarding the use of NCIC and our insistence that the New Mexico Department of Public Safety needed to be informed, and within that file there was a document from the communication director from APD, Ms. Wilson, who stated that in fact the proper notification for that case had not happened as it was supposed to. You'll recall that?
Mm-hmm.
And so with the chief's response, which is on the second page of this letter, where the CASA directs the chief shall consult with the relevant prosecuting agency or federal law enforcement agency regarding the initiation of a criminal investigation. The chief's response is internal affairs operates on my behalf, and under my direction they consulted with both relevant state and federal prosecuting agencies to discuss specifics of this case and to determine whether or not any criminal charges were feasible. You'll recall that in this case, the presentation to the prosecuting agency was a sergeant from the Internal Affairs Division making phone calls and posing hypotheticals to attorneys.
Yeah, I do remember that.
The chief goes on to say, this information gathering process was not done as a substitute for a criminal investigation, but as a guide for the administrative investigation. IA conducted a complete administrative investigation in accordance with the CASA and the SOP guidelines. Well, that's all well and good, but the issue was whether or not the chief made the referral to the criminal authority to make an assessment as to whether or not there was any criminal charges that would be brought. In order to do that, you have to present the entire facts of the case. You can't just simply have someone call and present some hypotheticals to an attorney and then base your opinion upon that. So that troubles me in this response, that I don't believe that is what the CASA intends when we make a referral for possible criminal charges. We don't expect that simply phone calls discussing hypotheticals is an actual presentation of facts to somebody to make a criminal determination. I don't think that suffices. I'll move on to the letter responding to the cert cases, which I believe is actually the second letter in the batch.
Is there a number?
There's multiple cert cases, C-00416, 00616. It's all in one letter.
Okay.
00916. My issues with this response is that it's now describing a completely new process for reviewing a cert case to determine whether or not an internal affairs investigation should commence for determining whether or not there's been an SOP violation by the individual officer. The chief is now describing the process as the cert case is completed, the investigation is done, and then the Force Review Board will make a decision whether or not there's going to be a referral to internal affairs for an investigation, a further investigation.
For criminal activity?
Not for criminal activity, for policy violations.
Okay.
Within in the administrative portion of it.
Right.
Prior to this, my understanding was that the detective or the sergeant, whoever did the investigation, could make that recommendation right away based upon their investigation and what they find. They could simply say, yes, this needs to be referred for further investigation on behalf of this officer. There may be a violation. Now the chief is describing the process as only Force Review Board will make those determinations. So again,
tell us how that affects us in particular, or what concerns you about that change in process?
Well, I have concerns, Chair Fine, I have concerns that the process seems to be ever-changing and evolving. You're already experiencing cert cases coming with little days' notice and without your ability to review. So there would be no ability for you to review it before it goes to the Force Review Board.
So is the Force Review Board being injected before us?
The Force Review Boards are being set up. At this point, they're being set up before you have a review.
According to this letter is my point.
Well, according to what's happening practically, and according to this, this doesn't discuss the timing. This simply discusses the fact that once a cert case is completed, it has to go before the Force Review Board in 30 days, and the Force Review Board is going to make the decision whether or not there's going to be further investigation of the officer for policy violations.
Okay, and are we within that 30 days still? Would we get the case before a Force Review got it?
Chair Fine, in theory you would. And in theory, the agreement based upon our meetings with all the parties before the fourth monitor's report, when we had our status conference with all the parties, the agreement was that you were going to get the same 30 days to review it before it went to the Force Review Board.
Right.
But as you're aware, that has not been happening. So not only do I have concerns that you're not going to have input that I suppose would funnel through me at the Force Review Board, but that the investigator on the CERT team apparently now cannot make a decision whether or not there needs to be more of an investigation and a referral. All of that is being left to the Force Review Board.
So does this short circuit us in any way? Does this usurp us in any way, the way it's written?
Well, Chair Fine, there really isn't anything in writing. This is simply the chief's response in a letter.
I know. Is that your concern, though?
My concern is that yes, you're not going to have input for these cases before they get to the Force Review Board.
Okay. That's certainly a concern. And if it goes to Force Review Board before we see it, because we have had concerns over at the quickness with the turnaround of this. Certainly, I don't want to see us usurped in any way, and I'm not happy about the fact that there were 5 cases that went through your office and not us, because as far as I'm concerned, that's not civilian review, so which is our purpose. So if this change in process is something we need more information about, should we ask Major Tyler to explain it to us now?
Chair Fine, I don't know that there's a written policy that describes this process. I think that it's simply the department deciding for expediency that this is how they're going to handle the cases, and somewhere there was a decision made that the Force Review Board is going to make all determinations, and I'm not sure that that's what the Force Review Board's function is supposed to be.
Okay, so do we want a clarification on this?
We need one, certainly.
Okay. Major Tyler, we need you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Chair Fine and members of the board, there needs to be some clarification on some of what was stated. Nothing prohibits a CERT detective from still identifying other conduct that was either related directly to a use of force or that would have been unrelated to the use of force during their investigation of a serious use of force. That CERT detective, the change that was made is if a CERT detective before was doing a serious use of force investigation and identified other misconduct, they were stopping their investigation and then sending that to their IA counterpart to investigate the misconduct. Rather than delineating that investigation and causing more time to occur, I gave them the authority, because CERT is under the IA umbrella, to conduct the whole investigation. Now, if the CERT detective does not identify any misconduct, that does not prohibit the Force Review Board from identifying misconduct that maybe they feel that the investigator missed. So that would be the situation that Director Harness was explaining. So our CERT detectives absolutely do have the ability, the authority, and the duty to identify any conduct, whether it's related to a use of force or if it comes out in any other part of their investigation for a serious use of force.
And in your opinion, this does represent a change in policy, right?
It represents a change in practice, but not in policy.
Okay, and in your opinion, how does that affect this body?
I don't think it does. We are required to send you all serious use of force cases, which would still occur.
Okay, in the same time frame?
Correct. As soon as the case goes to the Force Review Board is when we are now sending you the case to the POB for review as well.
Okay, so Mr. Harness doesn't need to worry about whether or not the CERT investigator has an opportunity to raise a red flag, or the Force Review Board does it either. Is that correct?
Correct. Anybody has a right to raise a red flag, as far as I'm concerned.
Does that satisfy you? Does that an answer you need?
Chair Fine, certainly, as Major Tyler describes it, that's certainly not detailed in the letter from the chief.
Okay. Well, you can see why this would be concerning.
Yes.
That's another problem with the letter.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would just ask Major Tyler that when we have like the breaking down of IA, when we were talking about the workflow, the breaking it down to the CERT and FIT and all of that stuff happened, and we didn't know about it. So even the agency may know about it, and I'm not sure they knew it completely. But when that stuff changes, we need to know because it affects us. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Also, if I may add one other thing, Director Harness also mentioned that there is some frustration that things seem to be continually evolving, and we see that as a good thing. Obviously, all of these reforms are very complex, and we're continually striving to improve the processes, which is why you're seeing the changes that you are.
Yeah, it's just concerning when something changes like this, and we see it in a letter like this, and then that's how we know. So it's concerning. So I realize you're in a moving thing, and we all think that's a good thing. We all want to get to the good place where the relation between the police department and the audience, the community, is good, and it's going to require change. But we need to be kept in the loop, okay, for all of that.
Yes.
We appreciate your
Thank you, Chair.
being here for that reason.
Chair Fine, can I just,
Sure.
a point of clarification for Director Harness? It was my understanding through this just communication, there's 30 days that we have to review it prior to going to the Forest Review Board. Is that correct?
Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, yes, that is the agreement, that once the case is completed, it must go before the Forest Review Board in 30 days. So once the case is completed and ready for the Forest Review Board, the CPOA and the POB are supposed to get that file at the same time.
We're working on a chart. Mr. Larson and I are working on a chart that's being revised, that we had, but it's being revised, and that will make more sense.
Clarify
to you
some
soon.
of that stuff. Okay.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chair, fine members of the board, just to clarify my earlier answer, we were talking in the context of the ordinance earlier when you asked about what the intent was, and I found additional information I think would be relevant to that question just briefly. Paragraph 285 of the settlement agreement, when it describes what the report back from the chief is supposed to read, it says the chief must provide a written report to the agency articulating the reasons its recommendations were not followed. So in terms of what the expectation is from the settlement agreement.
So just saying we saw those facts differently doesn't do it.
The standard would be that the reasons for the disagreement are articulated.
Good, thank you. That's what we were hoping for too. Yes, sir.
Before we leave this particular issue, I've actually been looking at these letters from the chief, and every one of them, the last line says, please contact me if any further clarification is needed. Well, let's contact him and say, we need further clarification.
I think we've done that through Major Tyler. The commander is giving me his nod. Yes, we have. Okay.